I wanted to start with a really remarkable quote from Syed Hossein Nasr. The sacred architecture of Islam is a crystallization of Islamic spirituality and a key for the understanding of this spirituality. The spaces it has created provide a haven in which man can savor, by grace of this very spirituality, the peace and harmony of not only virgin nature, but also paradise, of which virgin nature herself is a reflection. This paradise, which man carries at the depth and center of his being, where the divine presence reverberates, for the heart of the faithful is the throne of the compassionate. Sacred architecture may be simply defined as the art of ordering space with the aim of placing humanity in the presence of the divine. This would suggest that any attempt to uncover and comprehend the principles of this art, no matter what tradition we are speaking of, would require, first of all, that we possess some appreciation for the sacred, the centrality of the divine foundations for all of what we call human experience, and for the profound symbolic value of sacred geometry and number. In a secular, materialistic, and profane culture such as ours, this in itself may be our most difficult barrier. Though Islam on its surface may appear to be unique, relatively simple and direct in its principles and exoteric practices, its inner dimension is intellectually multifaceted, deeply mystical, exceedingly rich, and universal. The universality of its most esoteric features, as found in its architecture, are particularly important because they allow us to see consonance not only with other Abrahamic traditions, but with the spiritual quest as it is manifest in great Eastern traditions of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Of course, sacred architecture is not only intimately connected with the religious, spiritual, philosophical, and intellectual climate from which it emerges, but also the level of development of mathematics, engineering, the building arts, and all the related crafts. It would be fair to say then that in order to do justice to the topic of sacred architecture in Islam, one would need a thorough knowledge of all of these cultural aspects and their historical development, at least at a rudimentary level, and some basic understanding of Arabic, as well as many years of spiritual discipline, studying under and meditating upon the Quran under the guidance of a true sheikh or Sufi master. And we've done none of these things, and instead must be thought of as an ignorant outsider, relying heavily upon the work of such scholars as Titus Burckhardt, Henry Corbin, and Syed Nasr. Completed in 1987, Nasr's book entitled Islamic Art and Spirituality points out that an entire library of works of over a dozen languages have been written in the study of the history, description, and material characteristics of Islamic art. But until recently, that is until the late 80s, the question of its origin had been ignored or misconstrued. And he raises the question, how is it that an artistic and architectural tradition of such tremendous beauty, solemnity, and sophistication, with a clear and convincing unity of form that is a very recognizable Islamic character, that would maintain itself across centuries and diverse cultural boundaries, how is it that such a tradition was given birth in less than a century after the death of its prophet? It has been likened to the sudden crystallization of a supersaturated solution the quick release of an enormous creative potentiality that is rarely seen in the course of history. It is certainly acceptable, says Nasser, that this flowering of the arts was a result of the socio-political conditions created by Islam through the cohesion of the religious and social orders that it established. Also, it is clear, he writes, that Islam was nourished and fertilized as it spread geographically over the middle belt of the world and became the heir of many earlier civilizations and great centers of learning in Western Asia, the Mediterranean world, and North Africa. Islam, at its finest, did not destroy other great cultural traditions, but allowed and appreciated, absorbed, and learned from them. It is not an accident that wherever Islamic art has experienced a peak of its creativity and perfection, there has also been present a powerful current of tolerance and eclectic blending, merging the spiritual with the leading edges of scientific, philosophical, and intellectual knowledge. And wherever this current has been lost, says Nasser, so too has the art diminished. But behind the screen of visible culture, foremost and fundamentally, he says, it is to the inner dimension of Islam, its spirituality, rooted in the esotericism of the Quran and what he calls the very substance of the soul of Muhammad, the inner truth and blessing of his life that provides the primary impetus and guide for understanding. And this deep spiritual current and blessing has remained, he says, as an invisible presence within the Islamic world, not only through the hadith, the teachings that followed the Quran, and the sunnah, the customs of the Prophet, but also in an intangible way within the hearts of all true Muslims. And this, he says, that, or is in this way that Islamic architecture in its very finest moments should be seen as the fruit of Islamic spirituality, a crystallization in the world of forms of the inner realities of the Islamic sacred ethos. It functions, he says, not only as an aid, complement, and support for the spiritual life in that tradition, but as a sanctified means of dhikr, which is remembrance of the divine. Remembrance in its fullest meaning, he says, is the return of man to his origin in universal unity and the fulfillment of human purpose as the living link between heaven and earth. So we are clearly entering into deep waters. However, at a preliminary level, Nasser helps us by pointing to 5 principles that appear as links of continuity in the Islamic tradition of sacred architecture, no matter which ethnic culture it appears in, and which also correspond to principles of Islamic spirituality and cosmology. Number 1, the orientation of space as centered upon the Kaaba as the divine throne of Allah and axis of the earth. Number 2, invoking the remembrance of Allah and the Prophet through the reenactment in form or content of the first mosque, the house of the Prophet. Number 3, invoking the unseen through the use of the void. Number 4, qualifying space through the use of sacred geometry, Quranic inscription, and the arabesque. And 5, humanity as the image of God, the blending of microcosm and macrocosm. The orientation of space as centered on the Kaaba as the divine throne of Allah and the axis of the earth. To properly undertake a study of Islamic architecture, there is no other place to begin than the Kaaba, Mecca. The Kaaba is deeply revered as the sacred center and cornerstone of the Muslim world, the hub of a great wheel towards which every mosque in the world points and towards which every Muslim faces 5 times a day for the daily prayers. It is the place to which every Muslim wishes to travel, both outwardly in pilgrimage, called the Hajj, and inwardly in drawing closer to God. For the Muslim, it is the world axis on the physical plane, pointing to that which is the metaphysical axis of the Islamic cosmos. It is commonly called the house or dwelling place of God, his home or throne on earth. And here he dwells in the ungraspable center of the world, as he dwells in the innermost center of man. The Kaaba is a cube. The word means cube, built of masonry. It is a room about 35 by 40 feet by 50 feet tall, is only allowed to be entered during 1 month of the Muslim lunar calendar, and which is visited by roughly 1 million Muslims every year. The Kaaba has within it, embedded in its eastern corner, about 5 feet above the ground, the venerated black stone, a meteorite, considered a gift from the heavens, which is revered as a source of great spiritual benefit and blessing. The signature of the Kaaba's cubical shape is layered with meaning and offers our first glimpse into the metaphysics and cosmology of the Quran. Its surfaces or faces point to the 6 directions of space, suggesting omnipresence. One horizontal axis of the Kaaba points to the summer solstitial sunrise, and its opposite end, the winter solstitial sunset, while the other 2 points refer to the equinoxes. But these 4 points, with the black stone as the 5th, are considered the lower end reflection of a higher divine reality. The Kaaba is said to have been built under its equivalent throne in heaven, and its 4 cardinal points, guarded by the 4 archangels, are called pillars or archon of the temple, are also the metaphysical pillars of the cosmos, the connecting links between the sensible and the celestial realms, the means of communication between heaven and earth. Though Islamic cosmology was first outlined in the Quran and in the Hadiths or teachings of the Prophet, it was later explained and elaborated by generations of Muslim sages, philosophers, and mystics. Its fundamental and overarching principle is unity as expressed in the first Shahada, usually translated as "there is no God but Allah," or more generally, "there is no divinity but the divine." However, within that unity is a measured or ordered descent or differentiation from the most universal and spiritual plane to the plane of visible and corporeal life. Thus, the universe is spoken of in various writings as comprised of 3, 5, 7, or 70,000 planes or veils, which separate Allah, the one reality, from the world of matter and sense. These layers are sometimes conceived of as domes or tents placed one above the other. Each plane of the universe is centered by a sanctuary. Each sanctuary is a reflection of that which lies above it, forming a series leading up to the supreme sanctuary, the throne of God, the compassionate. The Kaaba, standing allegorically at the center of the world, lies on the center axis that runs through the deific center of all worlds in this conception. And in this illustration, the multiple states of being in the cosmos are represented by 5 squares, representing 5 planes, what the Sufis called the 5 divine presences, and which Islamic philosophers from the 12th century on, from al-Suhrawardi onwards, fully accepted as a kind of ground plan or pattern of reality. Suhrawardi was the founder of the Illuminationist or Ishraqi school, a philosophy of light or of intellectual intuition that was influenced by Platonism, Hermeticism, and especially the teachings of Persian Sufi mystics and masters. Each cosmic plane is centered by a throne. Each corner of the throne represents one of the 4 fundamental aspects of that plane of reality. The highest throne is the throne of sovereign unity, emerging as the breath of the all-merciful. And this highest throne is also seen in some mystical commentaries as the square base of an unseen four-sided pyramid, whose triangular faces symbolize the triadic logos, the first three names of the 99 names of Allah, those of mercy, rigor, and wisdom, while the invisible pinnacle at the top of that pyramid, again, pointing to the unitary origin. The Kaaba is the earthly axis, which corresponds, or which comprehends rather, total time and total space, and connects each and every plane of being up to the highest. The Prophet himself, it is believed, had first prayed before the divine throne, a condition of mystical or cosmic consciousness, before he prayed upon the ground, thus sanctifying earth as the mirror and reflection of the rapturous beauty and harmony of heaven. The Kaaba is therefore called, quote unquote, the place of the divine presence, the heart, the most secret and hidden, but also the most outward. Metaphysically, it is both the center and circumference of the cosmos in its ordered manifestation. And as such, it is the paradigm for all sacred Islamic architectural works in their symbolism and orientation. As the axial pole towards which every mosque is meant to point. And I understand that these days when new mosques are built, they use exact satellite orientations in order to determine where that direction should be in any given country. So the Kaaba does not provide simply the horizontal orientation of space, but the vertical dimension as well. And in that sense, every mosque both engenders and is meant to participate in the metaphysical meanings associated with the Kaaba, to the extent that then every mosque becomes an earthly location and representation of a higher divine or cosmic reality. So the second principle, invoking remembrance of Allah and the Prophet through the reenactment in form or content of the first mosque, the house of the Prophet. The very word mosque derives from the Arabic masjid, which literally means the place of prostration, the third position in the Islamic ritual prayers, in which the forehead of the worshiper touches the ground in the act of submission and surrender. And this prayer, which is a repetition of that prayer and prostration, which the Prophet was known to have practiced, is performed 5 times a day in a mosque or wherever a Muslim happens to be, but always facing the Kaaba. So this act of prostration is central to the meaning of the word Islam itself, which is both peace and surrender, the surrender of the personal will to the divine will, the separative self to the universal self, the servant to his Lord, again, which the Prophet exemplified and which is the highest aim of every true Muslim. Person of faith in a mosque is like the sun reflecting in the water. The basic floor plan of the mosque is thought to be derived from the accidental shape and plan of the house of the Prophet. However, as great philosopher mystics such as Ibn al-Arabi have pointed out, nothing in the life of the Prophet can be considered accidental or devoid of occult or hidden significance. For the Prophet's house consisted of a simple square plan built of sun-dried mud brick walls, roughly 150 feet square. On the eastern wall, exterior to the courtyard, were 9 rooms, while on the northern and southern walls stood short colonnades of palm trunks supporting palm fronds for shade. And the door on the southern wall was called the Qibla, indicating the direction of Mecca and the Kaaba. The Qibla is the origin of what became the mihrab, or prayer niche, in every mosque constructed since the 8th century. The word mihrab literally means refuge, and it is in one sense the heart of the mosque, the place from which blessedness issues, the place of the appearance of divinity, it is said. The Quran uses the word mihrab to describe a secret place in the temple at Jerusalem, where the Holy Virgin entered into a spiritual retreat and was nourished by angels. And many mihrabs are surrounded with inscriptions from the Quran telling this story. It is in the heart that the virgin soul takes refuge to invoke God. As for the nourishment miraculously bestowed there, it corresponds to grace. This is one of the few mosques that I personally have had the great privilege of visiting, the great mosque of Cordoba, Spain. And without doubt, the most stunning and inspiring moment in visiting this location was standing before the mihrab beneath this light-filled dome. As tradition goes, the prophet would often climb a simple three-stepped pulpit known as a minbar, a judge's seat in pre-Islamic times, to lead the prayer or to give a sermon. The minbar also eventually became an important interior feature of many mosques as the symbol of spiritual authority in the ceremony of prayer and for all related mosque activities. In practice, the leader of prayers ascends only to the mid-level of the stairs, which compose the minbar, while the upper level, under the throne, is left vacant, symbolizing the invisible presence of Muhammad. For Muslims, the Prophet was and is the universal or perfect man, containing within himself the perfections of all horizontal and vertical dimensions of universal existence. And we find this idea in other traditions as well, this merging of the microcosm and macrocosm, which we'll go into more detail a little bit later. But through what the Sufis call, quote, the inner reality of the Prophet, unquote, the breadth and depth of cosmic existence, the spiritual cosmos in which the Muslim breathes and lives, is restored to its original paradisiacal wholeness. And this is one reason why not only the floors of many traditional mosques, but the walls and the ceilings are covered with geometric or arabesque patterns. Again, through the inner reality of the Prophet, the common was realized as sacred. Matter, all matter imbued and imprinted with the order and harmony of heaven, the earth restored and blessed as a reflection of the cosmic. Arabesque patterns, rather than simply a decorative technique borrowed from previous cultures that Islam encountered, also appears to have a history of development within Islamic art and architecture that associates it with elements of cosmology and philosophy. The term arabesque is commonly used to refer to the stylized plant forms that you see here in orange above the opening to this mosque entrance. Curvilinear interlacements with an underlying geometric grid. Burckhardt, who's one of the authors we're drawing from this evening, called them, quote, perfect visual transcription of rhythm, unquote, images of paradise, and an abstract expression of the idea of interconnectedness as manifested in the profusion and generosity of nature. The arabesque is said to invite a contemplative state instead of ensnaring the mind and leading it to some imaginary world. The profusion of pattern upon surface, it is said, tends to dissolve mental fixations, just as contemplation of a running stream or a flame or of leaves quivering in the wind can detach consciousness from its inward idols. The mosque seeks to place the seeker within the sacred space of spiritual wholeness, which the Prophet actualized, to bring his inner reality to bear in the present moment. In the mosque, sitting on the ground itself is a normal position of rest and contemplation. The interior of the mosque is made to be seen from this position, which amounts to saying that it relates to the earth and its various components. Pillars, columns, and arcades are distributed in such a way as to make each spot a center sufficient unto itself. And this is very dramatically and wonderfully exemplified in the Great Mosque at Cordoba, which is considered one of the most remarkable monuments of the Umayyad Caliphate. And it's one of its primary characteristics when you enter the mosque is this literal forest of columns supporting the roof. But as you can see, there's two tiers of arches. The lower one, resting on the columns, has this slight return at the base. It's referred to as a horseshoe arch, and that is said to be a reference to pointing to the human heart as the critical factor of reverence. But in this case, as you can see, there's a second set of arches that are where the columns are extended not only upward, but outward beyond the lower set of columns. And this, in combination with the alternating bands of red and white, visually overcomes the weight and inertia of a very large roof, which is also decorated in some areas, but gives the whole space a kind of breathing motion and expansion outwards from an omnipresent center. At the same time, the exterior limits of the space tend to play no role at all. The walls of the prayer hall disappearing beyond the forest of arcades, and the sheer repetition and size giving the impression of endless extension. This also is emphasized by the way the mosque is lit through openings in the roof. The spaces and forms of the traditional Muslim town and city are, in a sense, extensions of the mosque, organically related to it and participating in its influence in the same way that the whole city benefits from the chanting of the Quran and the call to prayers issuing from the precincts of the mosque. So our third principle, invoking the unseen through the use of the void. As we heard, the first testimony of Islamic faith, there is no divinity but the divine, is a profound metaphysical statement with many aspects and levels of meaning, as demonstrated by the centuries of commentary that followed its declaration. Its first and foremost meaning, according to Nasser, is that it is a declaration of unity, and as such, is not unique, of course, to Islam, but can be found in one form or another in every tradition which preceded Islam. This verse is also understood in one of its meanings as a negation of the idea that there can be anything that exists outside of or other than God. So God is universally immanent. At the same time, it suggests that no individual or particular thing can encompass the totality of God, for the divine is ultimately beyond all limitation and definition. Emptiness or the void, therefore, is the symbol of both the transcendence of God and his presence in all things. In much of the sacred architecture of the Western world, the primary focus of space definition is typically around a positive form, such as an image, an icon, a rose window, an altar. In many Christian churches, it's the cross itself. And this gives the space its primary orientation and meaning. In Islamic architecture, space is not determined by a positive object, but by the absence of objects. The Kaaba is an empty room. The mihrab is an empty recess in the wall of the mosque. These monumental gateways, called iwans, that announce the entrance to the mosque in Persian architecture, are cavities, caves, or caverns defining the gateway to the unseen. This is the masjid, the mosque at Isfahan in Iran. And these gateways, along with their decoration, of course, with many elements, on the both interior and exterior are considered a kind of high point of 11th century Persian artistic genius. The central theme of the mosque itself is the sacred interior space, which it envelops, devoid of icons, which tend to trap the mind and fixate it upon a corporeal image. The prohibition of images or icons in the sacred art of Islam not only dissuades the likelihood of concretization of the divine presence, but also intensifies the spiritual significance of the void in the Muslim mind. God in his revelation cannot be identified with any particular image, time, or object. His presence is both invisible and ubiquitous, as in the Quranic verse, "Whithersoever ye turn, there is the face of God." Emptiness becomes synonymous with the manifestation of the sacred. The void in Islamic architecture, says Nasser, is, quote, is like a path cut through the density of material forms so as to enable the spirit to breathe in a world which would otherwise suffocate it, unquote. Our fourth principle, qualifying space through the use of sacred geometry and Quranic inscription. In the Islamic perspective, the order and rhythms of nature reflect an issue from the archetype of all existence in the divine order. In the Quran, everything is created according to measure, or to quote a Quranic verse, quote, "Everything with him has its measure," unquote. The root of the Arabic word for measure, miqdar, is related to kudra, or power, or force. God, as the all-powerful, has determined the measure of all creation. The very power which created the world of nature and man is also that which revealed the Quran. God is therefore also all-wise, quote, "in whose hand is the dominion of all things," unquote. Hence, from the Quran itself, we have the idea that the origin of power, of revelation, of wisdom, hikmah, is also the origin of the order and harmony perceived throughout creation. And in the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet, the primary or highest level of divine unfoldment from the One is also associated with the idea of the first light, called An-Nur, within the darkness, and with the idea of the word, Al-Kalam, the first utterance that initiated the emergence of being from non-being. And of course, we could see correspondences here between the Word of God, as spoken of in St. John's Gospel, and the ideal of Vak in Hinduism, that primordial sound or vibration by which all things manifest. And this idea plays a fundamental role in the conceptual and decorative aspects of mosque architecture and design, as we're beginning to see. Another point emphasized in the Quran is that human reason, which is the reflection of the divine intellect, when healthy, balanced, and not misled by passions or by external illusion, can become itself an instrument of unity. Scholars of, quote, the hidden science of letters, unquote, contained within the Quran assert that Arabic revelation contains a hidden but bewildering mathematical structure and numerical symbolism that reveals what some have called Abrahamic Pythagoreanism. According to Nasser, it is the conviction regarding the higher capacities of human reason combined with the spiritual mathematics underlying the Quran that made the study of mathematical sciences so widespread in the Islamic world and enabled Muslims to adopt the Pythagorean and Hermetic sciences so easily as part of their worldview. The works of Euclid and Pythagoras were among the very first to be translated into Arabic in the 8th century, and the appreciation of the value of geometry, engineering, and astronomy as sacred sciences, consonant with Muslim culture, grew and blossomed to a high level of sophistication in less than 300 years, and reached its zenith in the 14th century, resulting in such startling creations as the Nasrid Palace of Alhambra in Granada, Spain. It's just a magical place to walk through. walls, ceilings, everything's alive. The title given to the architect planner is Muhandis, meaning he who geometrizes. And training occurred traditionally within the madrasa or the college. It included the study of mathematics, geometry, astronomy, music, and optics. And the whole educational system within Islam has its foundation in the craft guilds, which were traditionally associated with the Sufi orders and led or guided by a Sufi master, according to Nasser. Thus, training for the arts was not a vocation separated from spiritual discipline, nor perfection of the craft distinct from realization of the esoteric dimensions of the Islamic faith. Each of the arts were based upon a knowledge referred to by its traditional masters as hikmah, or wisdom. For centuries, knowledge, even pertaining to the foundation and hidden dimensions of the arts, was passed by means of an oral tradition. Methods and discoveries were disclosed only to a few. The long-established tradition where the master reveals his jealously guarded notebooks only to his sons or to a few devoted apprentices is still very much the mode employed today. In the early 1980s, mathematicians discovered that all 17 types of rotational symmetry that are possible in 2 dimensions were employed in one place or another in the tile patterns and reliefs of the Alhambra. Pythagoras was a Muslim sage in Muslim eyes, and the Pythagorean teachings themselves of ancient origins going back to Egypt, Babylon, and India provided an already elaborated language that conformed in its inner meanings to the cosmological perspective of the Quran. This doctrine, in part, teaches that numbers and geometric figures have not simply a quantitative, but also a qualitative reality, that they relate to the spiritual, unchanging, living presences behind and within the illusory screen of visible nature. Even the birth of the cosmos, the emanation of the many from the one, a metaphysical concept which is regarded as a reality that is ever present, according to Nasser, is analogous to the relationship between the number 1 and the rest of the number series. In geometrical terms, this emanation is expressed as the unfoldment from a dimensionless center to line and plane and figure. From center to circumference, each of the mandala-like arrangements found again and again in Islamic art and architecture expresses this fundamental theme of the differentiation of the many from the one, and, quote, the manner by which, through the multiple states of being composing the hierarchy of existence, the visible cosmos which surrounds us is manifested, unquote. In addition, as we've already stated, the visual symmetry, harmony, interrelatedness, and wholeness which these geometric patterns display is also an invocation of primordial or virgin nature, nature in its state of high blessedness, symbolized by the idea of heaven or of paradise, which is so deeply cherished in the sacred literature of Islam. Quote from Titus Burckhardt: there is something of both the lucidity and perfection of the snowflake and the beauty of a geometrically formed flower in the Islamic paradise, which, when manifest in Islamic architecture, recaptures an echo of that paradise and prepares the soul for the experience of that blessing promised in the Quran to the faithful. Number is not only the instrument of division, but of integration, synthesis, and unification. It is, quote, the spiritual image resulting in the human soul from the repetition of unity. It's a remarkable statement. This is from the Ikhwan al-Safa. It was a Sufi brotherhood that was very much focused on number and geometry in the same way that the Pythagorean tradition was. Mathematical knowledge in Islamic philosophy, when studied deeply in both its quantitative and qualitative aspect, was considered a ladder of Jacob, a bridge by means of which one can journey from this world to the world of divine archetypes, the source of all creation and all knowledge. But geometrical patterns and the language of forms in the Islamic tradition are not only abstract representations of the invisible or divine macrocosm, they are also invocations of the idea of the universal man, the microcosm. Um, I won't try and pronounce the Arabic word because I'm not sure about it, but it literally means the great man or the universal man, which in Islam was embodied, as we mentioned, in the Prophet. Man holds within him all the cosmic potentialities of the divine names, the archetypal source of all that is manifested. Or, more simply put, as in one of the hadiths of the Prophet, man was created in God's image. And one example of this idea is found in this architectural geometric theme that is found again and again in Islam in the classical shape of the domed mosque. And in this case, we're looking at the interior courtyard of 9th century mosque at Ibn Tulun in Cairo, Egypt. Both the fountain structure in the middle of the open courtyard and the taller minaret that's just beyond repeat this kind of triadic theme in the traditional domed mosque. That is, there's a square base, a middle octagonal drum, which provides the transition from the square to the round, and then the spherical dome itself. The square base, composed of mostly solid walls, corresponds to the body of man, to the terrestrial material plane of the cosmos. The middle octagonal drum upon which the dome usually rests is the mind or soul of man, and the unseen intelligences or angelic order in nature, which is the intermediate realm between the material existence and the spiritual. As a polygon of this middle section, midway between the square and the circle, it's emblematic both of the descent from the one to the many and the avenue of ascent from illusion to reality. The crowning dome is the transcendent human spirit, corresponding on the cosmic level to the spiritual vault of heaven, the causal realm of deific unity. And this mosque at Ibn Tulun is considered the most perfectly harmonious of the 9th century Abbasid mosques and captures as you can see here, a strikingly simple manner, the solemnity and grandeur of the desert environment, along with the tranquility and peace of the spiritual presence that it has. And while the walls of the interior courtyard maintain this kind of simple rhythm, again replicating the home of the prophet, and this rhythm of solid and void, also suggestive of the cycles of nature, permeated by the presence or the void of God. The walls, as you can see through the columns here and enlargement here, at the very top, they're crenellated in this way, which suggests that even the solid form is vibrating or dissolving at their edges in response to the unseen resonance of the word. The dome is in many architectural traditions the symbol of completeness, wholeness, and the omniscience of the highest spiritual state, the immutable realm of being, the heavenly vault where knower, known, and knowledge are united. But the pointed dome suggests the transcendence of that state, what in Islam would be referred to as al-haq, or the real, which transcends even the highest creative capacities or aspects of God. The external form of the dome also is said to symbolize the aspect of divine beauty called Jamal, the feminine or receptive character of deity, while the vertical minaret relates to what's called Jalal, divine majesty or the active intellect. This analogy and correspondence between microcosm and macrocosm and their expression in numerical and geometrical symbolism are, of course, universal ideas, not only evident in Greek, Islamic and Christian architectural cosmologies, but in Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism as well. The use of sacred geometry as the most cogent expression of a divine plan which underlies the world, an unchanging archetypal or metaphysical pattern which precedes and underlies the visible, ever-changing forms of nature, is recognized as being one of the fundamental concepts behind sacred structures since ancient times. The Egyptian and the Hindu temple, the Buddhist stupa, the Renaissance church, and the medieval cathedral, along with the Islamic mosque, are all at one and the same time both miniature cosmos and, quote, the body of the universal man, an attempt to mirror this idea in their own unique beauty and grandeur.